All right, so we're going to talk about target analysis real quick, and then you all are going to start your presentations. So, the first thing that you need, what's the first thing you need to establish if you're looking at a shooter's target before you go into what we're going to go into? Like if you're left, you know, too much trigger finger and all that stuff.
The group.
And in the context of this right now, we're just talking about target shooting, by the way. We'll incorporate some of the defensive shooting because it is different. But just looking at target shooting, what do we need to establish first? We need to establish that the student had a good sight picture when they took the shot. Because if they don't understand sight picture, then this isn't going to work. Because if they're doing some kind of Kentucky windage, holding up here because they know they shoot low left, well then you can't assess their target correctly. So you got to establish that first. So yesterday, the drill I showed you where they get the grip, they get the sight picture, and you're standing like this, and they keep their finger on the frame and you pull the trigger, that will establish that right away. You need to take at least 3 shots in order to get a good group, just like you would sight in a gun. I mean, everybody's got their own way, but me, when I sight in a gun, I take at least 3 shots because you could have one flyer, so I want to have some kind of trending data to make sure that I'm right before I make an assessment. So I take 3 shots. What are the caveats to doing that drill? You have to have good trigger control. If you don't have good trigger control, then the drill doesn't work. So if it's a gun that you're familiar with, like a Glock, like for me it's a Glock. I shoot predominantly Glock. So anything that has a trigger like a Glock, I know I can do the drill. But another reason you take 3 shots or 4 shots or 5 shots is because it's a whole different ball game when you're pulling the trigger with just your trigger finger and they're holding the gun. So you got to kind of get used to it. It takes a little bit to get used to it, get some practice in doing it.
They're pulling the trigger, or you're
pulling the trigger.
You're pulling.
Yeah, you're pulling the trigger.
But you're pulling their finger.
No, their trigger's on the frame. You're pulling the trigger. They don't have anything on the trigger, so they don't know when the shot's going to break.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so you do that first, and then once you establish that okay, it hit in the right place on the target. Now you can let them pull the trigger, or pull it with them to find out trigger control, or you can just go right into letting them shoot and then start assessing their target once you establish they have them. So, good sight picture. Right-handed shooter, we're going to start with right-handed. Here's our target. We're saying, you know, modern striker-fired gun, 10 to 20 feet for this whole assessment. Straight down, what is that normally attributed to? Most commonly. Keep that in mind. When we look at those targets that are online that are broken into pie, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying there's 2 or 3 other things most of the time that I would check before I ever use what was on that target.
Jerking the trigger?
What, who said that? Okay, yeah, jerking the trigger. Jerking. And what else?
Anticipating the shot.
Yeah, anticipating the recoil. Okay. Straight to the left.
Fingering.
Define that a little bit more.
You don't have the trigger right where it needs to be on the finger, so when you pull your finger back, you're pulling it to the side one way or the other. Right,
so too much finger through the trigger guard, the wrist breaks to the left. So they're pulling the trigger, but they have more than the center of that pad. Maybe they're on the joint, or maybe if they have long fingers, they're all the way through. So when the shot breaks, their wrist does that, shot goes to the left. So we're just going to call that too much finger. Okay. How about straight to the right? Not very common in a right-handed shooter, but it does come up.
Too little finger.
Too little finger. What can that also be caused by? Too little finger. What can that also cause is what I meant to say.
Too much finger in the trigger?
Well, we covered that, but if it's too little and it's to the right, can too little finger also make you go to the left? Yeah, possibly. It can. Because the front of the gun can do this, and then it could go to the left. But yeah, a lot of times most of the time it does go to the right. But there's one thing that's above that that I would check first.
Thumbing.
Yeah, you call it thumbing.
Lock string.
Loose grip with the right hand for a right-handed shooter, too much pressure on the support hand, or thumbing, whichever way you want to look at it, driving the gun to the right as they're pulling the trigger. So thumbing, I like to call it too much support hand.
So they're gripping too tight with their support hand?
Not too tight necessarily,
Okay.
but way more pressure than they are with their right.
Got it.
Because remember, the grip has to be should be an even tight pressure. Okay. So thumbing, too much support hand, and too little finger.
Well, see, I was experiencing some of that the last class, and I've got an issue with my left shoulder, and I wasn't putting the same amount of pressure shoulder-wise. So it was unequal. And every time I did that, I was shooting to my left, because my left shoulder wasn't engaged as much as my right shoulder. So it's kind of similar, but it wasn't my hands, it was back here that was the problem.
Yeah. All right, how about high? Dead center high.
Healing.
It's called healing. What is healing? Explain to me what the shooter's doing. Because a lot of people hear healing and don't know what it actually means.
If you grip it too tight, you will put more heel into the back of the gun to lift it. Also, if you grip too loose, you will
That's
actually,
what it is. Not too tight, too loose.
according to the book, it's both. But anyhow, if you grip too loose,
Remember, I'm teaching you this because
Okay.
the book isn't always right.
if the grip is too loose, before the bullet even leaves the barrel, you'll have a little recoil.
Right. If you're gripping the gun as tight as you can't squeeze it any tighter, so you're not going to put any extra pressure on the heel. So that wouldn't be healing and make the gun go up. It's when the grip is loose, because then as you're pulling the trigger, the grip tightens, which puts pressure on the heel, which makes the muzzle go up. So the grip's loose, the student's squeezing, and the muzzle's going up. So that's normally what you see in a high, for a high target. Normally it's healing, and what do we also call it? Or a similar. It's a form of anticipation. Riding the recoil. You see a lot of it with, you see it in bullseye shooting sometimes when people are shooting high, because they have that high and then they settle the gun. So look for that too. Remember, if this is the gun, I'm not a very good artist here, but that muzzle does not go up until the bullet's like out here somewhere. If you watch a video, like a high def video of a gun firing, the gun doesn't go up till the bullet's out of the barrel. So anything the student does to the gun before the bullet leaves the barrel is going to change where the bullet goes on the target. So healing and riding recoil. All right. Now, before we go to that side, to the left-handed shooter, what have I not covered here?
If they're gripping it too tight?
No, not that. I mean, target-wise.
Sight alignment or sight picture?
Sight all
No,
over.
we already established that, remember? We are assuming for this whole thing, the sight picture's good.
missing the target.
Nope.
Shotgun?
I'm only covering what's at the 12 o'clock position,
Yeah.
6 o'clock position, and so on. So now we need to break it in the 45-degree angle, the different increments. So whenever you're breaking up a target, this is important. If that's your piece of paper, or that's your target area, whatever it is, you're breaking it into 4 quadrants. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So anything they're doing in here is a combination of what? High and to the right. So they're doing some of this and some of this. If it's in this quadrant, in the 1 quadrant, they're doing this and this. Possibly. Maybe more of one than the other, but this is going to help you determine what they're doing. So if you can memorize this, but you really have to understand it. You have to understand what it feels like, what it looks like when a student does it. Because as an instructor, you're not watching the target. You're watching the shooter. That's very important when you get to the afternoon today. You should not be looking at the target. The student's going to be shooting a laser gun, when the red laser hits the target, it's going to go away. You're not going to see it. So if you're sitting there staring at the target, you might see the dot real quick, and then it's going to go away. So that's not going to help you. We're not going to turn the target on so you can see the hits until you're done with the lesson. So you need to be watching the shooter. So what does the target confirm?
Hopefully it confirms what you assume or you believe that just happened.
Exactly. By looking at the target, you're confirming what you already believe by watching the student. So if the student's right here, and this is the gun, my shoulder is not past the muzzle, but my head is right around the elbow area. So I'm watching the gun, the trigger finger, and the student's eyes, and I'm going between that. I'm not behind the student. I'm right there in the booth. You're not going to be able to see some of this minutia by standing behind the student. I'm not saying you should never stand back there, because you do need to get out of the booth so you don't get tunnel vision on their trigger finger and take a look at their overall stance. Remember, we're dealing, and what we're talking about today for you all teaching a first steps class, you haven't seen them shoot. Maybe they've never handled a gun, so you don't want to be out of the booth anyway. You need to be in the booth controlling the student, so if they do anything unsafe, you can stop them. Once you establish, okay, they get most of this, excuse me, and they're safe, then you can step out of the booth and look overall at everything. So if it's high right, what are they doing?
They're healing or right recoil, or thumbing it to low finger.
Okay. Low right?
They could be jerking, anticipating, or thumbing it to low finger.
Okay. High left?
Healing right recoil or too much finger.
Okay, and what's the most common for a right-handed shooter?
Jerking?
No, what's the most common place on the target to see rounds impacting for a new shooter? Low left, which is too much finger, which is most common, and jerking or anticipating the trigger. So those are the three things that you're going to see almost all the time with a right-handed shooter. For a couple of reasons. Number one, it is not natural for somebody to rest their finger in the center of that last pad, because look what it does. It puts a gap here. So depending on their hand size, that is not natural. Remember what we said, when people pick things up, they naturally want to do this. They're naturally going to put their whole finger through the trigger guard, which is going to end up being too much finger. So you're going to have to fight them to to get that gap there, to get the center of the last pad on the center of the trigger. What were you going to say?
The book, did you find any value in, you've defined these by quadrants. The book tends to define it by, for example, these are the grip errors and these are the other kind of errors, the anticipation errors. Do you find any value in that, or is that?
No, I'm showing you right now what is the most common thing you're going to see after working, thousands and thousands of hours on the range, one-on-one lessons. I'm not saying that stuff doesn't work and it's not applicable. I'm saying if you remember this, it'll make your life a lot easier. You should know all of it, but this will help you out a lot with new shooters. Because I mean, something like 90% of the time they're doing this, and out of that percentage, 50% of it they're not shooting high right, and they're not shooting high left, and they're not shooting low right. So I mean, it's most of the time it's below the middle of the target, and it's to the left, and then sometimes to the right. So for a left-handed shooter, straight down,
Jerking.
exactly the same thing as the right-handed shooter. For the left,
Too little.
exactly the same as the right-handed shooter when they shoot to the right. It's just the opposite for a left-hander. For left and right, for a left-hander, it's opposite of the right-hander. For vertical, up and down, it's the exact same thing as a right-hander. Make sense? So you're only remembering this information. You just got to get it in your head what the student's actually doing with the gun. Okay, having said all this, this was in the context of target shooting, and you're trying to get the student to shoot bullseyes, to shoot, you know, keyhole shots. And this is why we recommend starting, if you're going to work on these type of drills, with a 1/2-inch dot, because you don't want all kinds of stuff on the target, some big target, because you're going to see the group open up. Just by doing two things, if you're an instructor that has always used a bullseye and never worried about the student keeping contact with the trigger, just by switching it to a 1/2-inch dot on a blank piece of paper and getting them to keep contact with the trigger, even if you didn't know any of this, the group would cut in half, twice. First with the target, and then the next time by keeping contact with the trigger. Then, once you get to that point, now they're somewhere around right in here, at 8 to 10 feet. Now you need to know this stuff to get them to get down to that nice tight group.